Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to our Sustainable Mail Group Symposium, an introduction to the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. My name's Andrew Gustin, and I'm the Executive Director of SMG. And I just want to go through a couple of little minor housekeeping areas before we get into the meat of this. You can ask questions at any point in time during the session. But the questions themselves won't be answered till the very end. We are recording this, and if you can't make it to the end, or if you want to share this with anybody else, you can always go to our YouTube channel. If you haven't done that already, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and anytime anything comes up, you'll be able to view it as it gets released. Then the other thing is if you want to and we encourage anybody to enjoy to join the Sustainable Grow Group at the link provided in the chat and become part of the community. I've also included a few more details in here, specifically to the Sustainable Direct Mail Design Guide that we published last year, because there are some references to some of the material that we're discussing today in that. Also a link to our YouTube channel, and also to Zach's bio on LinkedIn, and a registration link to an event that we're hosting next week where we're going to be launching our direct mail plastics roadmap. So if you're interested in any of those events or any of the details, feel free to click on any of the links or copy them. So let me start off by asking Zach to introduce himself. So Zach, welcome to the session, and tell us who you are.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I'm Zach Wegman. I'm the Senior Manager of Market Access here at the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. A lot of my work revolves around talking about SFI certification and the value that that brings to the supply chain, as well as getting more companies on board with SFI certification. So excited to talk about how that might be relevant for folks on the call today.
Thanks, Zach. And just to give people a little flavor of this, I mean, the reason why we ended up discussing this, and I brought this up just previously, is that in our design guide, we advocate for print buyers, printers, and designers to use chain of custody certified papers. And in order to ensure that when they're using chain of custody, that they, provide assurance that steps are being taken to ensure that the paper that they're using is sourced from sustainable and legally harvested sources. So we felt that it was up to us to provide an introduction to the folks at SFI through this thing. So Zach, I'll put up the deck. Unlike some of our other presentations, you've actually got or seminars, you've actually got a deck here. I've got some questions as well, and if any of your deck kind of misses out on some of the questions, I'll kind of jump in. And again, at any point in time, anybody who's listening to this has a question, feel free to put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A. We won't answer them till the very end of the session, but we'll make sure that we get to them. So hold on, Zach. Let me just get that up there. And let me just get it onto your page. There you go.
Awesome. So yeah, today I'll be talking to you about the role of SFI for the Sustainable Mail Group. Next slide, please. A little bit of high level about the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. Our vision is a world that values and benefits from sustainably managed forests. And our mission is to advance sustainability through forest-focused collaboration. And so it's through this vision and mission that guides a lot of the work that we do. Next slide, please. We're also governed by a board that has equal representation from the environmental, social, and economic sectors. These are all high-level executives from their respective organizations that provide guidance and input into a lot of the work that we do. For some folks here in Canada that might be more familiar, some of the organizations you might be more familiar with, Michael Nadler, who's the CEO of Ducks Unlimited Canada, Catherine Grenier, President and CEO of Nature Conservancy Canada. We also have Leonard Joe, who's the CEO of the BC First Nations Forestry Council. So a lot of diverse perspectives brought to the table through our board, and it helps drive our mission and our vision. Next slide, please. So we do a lot of work here at SFI, and we organize it into four key pillars of work. The standards are what's most relevant to today's talk and what I'll be focusing on, but it's also important that you're aware of our other work in conservation, uh, community engagement, and environmental education. Next slide, please. With respect to forest certification and standards, it can kind of feel like a little bit of alphabet soup. There's a lot of different organizations, acronyms, and it's hard to understand what's going on when you're new to this space. But if we take a global perspective, next slide, please, and look at all of the forests in the world, 90% of them are not certified to any forest certification standards. It's that 10% remaining that SFI and other forest certification standards play within. Next slide, please. And of that 10% of certified forests in the world, SFI represents over 1/3 of that. We are a member of the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, and they're a global entity that endorses forest certification standards across the world, so in different countries. SFI only has forests that are certified to our standards in Canada and the United States. But despite this, our certifications account for over half of PEFC's worldwide forest certifications. So we represent quite a big space just despite being in only 2 countries. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, where our forests are certified only in North America, and you can see the year-over-year growth that we've had at 147 million hectares. We actually make up more certified land than all of the other certification standards combined in this space. Next slide, please. So at SFI, we have 5 different certification standards, and they are applicable or more or less relevant based on what kind of organization you are and where you fall in the supply chain. So that first one in the list, the forest management standard, that was that graph that I just showed with the year-over-year growth in Canada and the United States. For folks on today's call, it's that third one that I'll be focusing on, the SFI chain of custody standard. But again, it's important for you to understand that there are other standards that we have, such as our fiber sourcing standard, our module for Indigenous peoples and families, as well as our urban and community forest sustainability standard. So like I mentioned, depending on where you are in the supply chain and the role that you play, it'll determine which standard is most relevant to you. Next slide, please. Back one, sorry. However, regardless of which standard you are getting certified to, all of our standards are audited and certified by independent certification bodies. So these are all organizations that have been accredited to certify to our standards independently of us. So SFI is in no way involved in the certification process. These companies come in and do annual audits with every certified company to ensure that they are meeting the standards that we set out. Next slide, please. So the SFI chain of custody standard, really what it is, it's an accounting system that tracks forest fiber through the manufacturing process to an end product. So as you can see in this diagram here, fiber going into products can originate from a certified forest, a non-certified forest, or recycled material. That then gets passed on to a paper manufacturer, onto a converter, and then onto a final product. And so at each of these steps in the supply chain, each of those organizations would hold an SFI chain of custody certificate. And that allows them to track the certified content coming in and going out of their facilities. And so it's only through that supply chain where every entity is certified that the final product can be labeled with the SFI on product label. Next slide, please. So these are some examples of what that looks like. They're recognized globally. and they provide a visual cue to help customers source products from responsibly managed forest. And so depending on what's on that label, it communicates the claim that's being made by that certified company. You'll also notice that at the bottom, there's an SFI. On these pictures, it's 0001. But each company that's certified has their own unique label ID number. So when you're purchasing something with the SFI label, you can look up that label ID number on our database and find out who applied that label and is making that claim. Next slide, please. One more back. I think I might have skipped over. Yeah. And so we have over 500 chain of custody certificates and growing. So a lot of companies are seeing value in holding that chain of custody certificate to track the materials coming in and then make claims on the products that they're selling. Next slide, please. One option, so what I just outlined is when every company holds an individual certificate for their own company. One option that may be of interest for folks on today's call is exploring group chain of custody certification. In this instance, one company takes care of the administration of holding a certificate, and then other companies are housed underneath it. And so through the group certification, it allows for shared costs, more efficient audits, and simplicity. We have an example of a group certificate in the US with the Regional Affiliate Certificate Group. So if this is something of interest to folks on today's call, I'm happy to take questions about that or continue the conversation afterwards. Next slide, please. So the process to getting certified to our chain of custody standard is relatively straightforward. The first step is to go onto our website and complete an SFI application form. These are reviewed and approved by our staff within 24 hours. And from there, you would prepare for your audit. So you can reach out to any or all of those certification bodies I had listed earlier, and they can help you out with what you need to do to get prepared for your audit. So making sure you have the correct processes in place, making sure your paperwork's in order, and then it would be time to get audited yourself. And once you're successful with that, you'd sign a trademark license agreement with us. And from there, you can use the SFI trademarks or on-product labels on your products. Next slide, please. I think it went too ahead. So here are some examples of what that looks like on a cardboard box or paper cut. And again, they each have those unique SFI label ID numbers to communicate who has made that claim on their product. Next slide, please. We do a lot of engagement with our certified organizations to find out or to better understand the value that they receive from being certified. And 79% of SFI certified organizations have reported steady or increased demand for SFI certified products, which is more than any other forest certification standard. So and this is a consistent thing that we see in our outreach, is that companies are seeing the value of getting certified and being able to sell certified products. Next slide, please. On the consumer end, there is a high awareness associated with SFI. So 52% of consumers have heard of SFI. And of that 52%, 90% trust SFI. And so getting certified is one of the ways that corporations are helping to build trust between their brands and their consumers. Next slide, please. We've also found that 33% of consumers are looking for the SFI logo on packaging. And so here we've got some other certification standards outside of forestry, and you can see that you might be familiar with, like Energy Star or Fair Trade Coffee. Among forest certification standards, we were the highest certification that folks are looking for at 33%. Next slide, please. And products that are certified to SFI are sold in more than 113 countries. So we have that awareness globally, and people are looking for the label when they are purchasing products. Next slide, please. Every year we do a survey with our certified organizations to find out what's going on in the marketplace, what are they seeing. And this year, the top 3 reasons were the same top 3 reasons last year for why organizations get certified to SFI. The first one being it shows their customers that they can meet their sustainability objectives. Number 2 was shows that responsible forest management is important to our customers. And number 3 was helping the companies themselves achieve their sustainability objectives. And then it's one thing to be certified, but then it's a step further to actually go ahead and use the label on your products. And the top 3 reasons for deciding to use the SFI logo on your products, first one was to communicate the commitment to sustainability. Number 2 was the consumer and market demands. And number 3 was creating a positive corporate image. Next slide, please. There's also a lot of global initiatives and projects that are emerging that SFI is naturally well positioned to align with. So some of you may be familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These were a set of 17 goals set out in 2015 that UN member countries could work towards as goals for 2030. And we've pulled out some of the ones that just naturally are aligned with the work that we do here at SFI. I mentioned we do environmental education, which is their 4th goal. Climate action aligns well with our forest management standard. So does number 15 and number 6, life on land and clean water. And I guess for folks on today's call, number 12, responsible consumption and production would be relevant to you. So through the work being done to get certified and the standards that we create, that does help support these UN Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. In the investment world, ESG is a really big up and coming priority, which stands for environmental social governance. And companies are beginning to get rated based on their ESG performance. So with our standards, we're naturally aligned to support organizations in their work in the ESG space. For the environmental side, our forest management standard calls out specifically climate change and fire resiliency. We have specific measures around biodiversity and species recovery, as well as water quality and quantity. For the social aspects, our forest management standard has a lot in there about Indigenous peoples' rights and recognition, building a diverse workforce, and environmental education, forest literacy. And then having the SFI standards implemented within your organization aligns nicely with the governance aspect. So we are seeing that organizations are using their SFI certification to help align themselves with the ESG ratings that are going on. Next slide, please. So in summary, SFI, we're more than a standard. We are heavily involved in conservation impact, community engagement, and environmental education. We have one forest management standard that is applicable to both Canada and the United States, which allows for consistency. Being the largest standard in North America, we have the scale and supply for the mailing supply chain. One of the things I didn't get into, it's more related to the community engagement that we do, our SICs, which stands for SFI Implementation Committee. We do a lot of work with them, and they're regional groupings of SFI-certified organizations that does a lot of community engagement and logger training. And then we also do a lot of measuring of how our standards are impacting key topics such as climate change, diversity, biodiversity, and water quality. So with high market demand and consumer awareness, SFI is well positioned to support you in your sustainability objectives. And we're well aligned to address emerging global initiatives and priorities. So with that, I will pause here and see if we have any questions.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, we actually have a few questions. One in the Q&A, which is actually pretty long, and I'll get to that in a second. Just kind of going through this, Zach, out of the 500 certificates that are presently held in Canada, do you know how many of those might end up being attributed to paper manufacturers and/or printers? Is there any way that you can kind of carve that element out? Because I know you have a very sizable um, role in lumber. I mean, I know I see SFI in a lot of places in Home Depot and the like. Any
Mhm.
sense as to how that kind of plays out?
Yeah, so with the lumber side of things and our forest management standard, if you hold a forest management standard, that means you're out managing the forest, harvesting and providing lumber to the supply chain. So with that standard, you don't actually need a chain of custody certificate. So with that 500 chain of custody certificates, the majority of them would be paper and cardboard, more the paper products side of things rather than the wood product side of things.
Oh wow. Okay. That's quite a big number then. Um, I'm just going to turn to the question in the Q&A, and I'm not sure necessarily if this is kind of relevant to you, but if I know some of what some of the insight here is, but I'll ask it anyways, and if you feel you can chime in on something. So the question is from Peter Panesis. Peter, hopefully I did pronounced your name properly and I didn't butcher it, but so do you have any updates slash insights on the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act? So as they understood as an upcoming regulation for Canadian companies to report on paper usage and to remit a small percentage of funds to the government. Do you know if this is still moving forward? So if I'm not mistaken, the reference actually ends up being the Resource and Recovery and Circular Economy Act. In Ontario specifically, that's what it's called, but there are similar pieces of legislation in almost every single province across the country. And at a more kind of ground level, what we're talking about here is extended producer responsibility. So the expectation that companies that introduce materials into the waste stream in each one of the provincial jurisdictions are all responsible either for a portion of or for the entirety of the recycling of those materials. So in Ontario, that actually is moving forward, has been moving forward for quite a while. It's shifted over um, from what it was historically, where it was like a 50-50% split between the municipalities actually administering the recycling costs and the producers reproducing the recycling, covering the recycling costs, now to 100% producer-based system. What I'd suggest, Peter, is I'll put my email address in the chat here, and if you want to get any more detail, I'll gladly, follow up with a conversation and provide some resources towards that. You can also go into our YouTube channel where we actually held a session probably about 18 months ago or so, talking about EPR and its impact across the country. What I would suggest is the biggest thing that you probably need to end up establishing is whether you're an obligated steward. So, the possibilities may be very well that you may not be obligated, but one of your customers might be obligated. But that's something, that I can't provide any answers towards. I think you need to get to the necessary resources, and I can provide you some insight around that. So Peter, I'll put my email address in the chat for you.
And
Zach, do you want
Andrew, if
to?
I could
Yep.
just jump, yeah, if I could just add
Oh,
in
sure.
there with respect to the circular economy, with the chain of custody standard, there are procedures in place to track recycled content, both pre and post consumer in your manufacturing process. And that's something that you can communicate in the label that you apply with the chain of custody label of how much recycled content is being included in that product.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, in fact, because and again, this kind of we're starting to slice the onion pretty thin here, but I think that that's going to be very relevant into some of those jurisdictions where recycled content is going to end up being important. Right now, I think that's Quebec, possibly. We actually have some folks from Eco-Entreprise Quebec on our board. So, Peter, if you really want to get the details to that, I can, connect you with the necessary resources. But Zach's comment is very valid, and that's a tool that, may facilitate, if you're an obligated steward, to providing that necessary level of detail. So my email address is in the chat right now. Zach, you talked about group certification. Are there any constraints? And I know because this question came up in a previous session around not constraints, but perhaps um, uh, use or levels of volume or revenue that are a threshold for group certification. So if you're a bigger player, you may want to go to an individual certificate or may be forced to go to an individual certificate. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know if I can speak to the specifics of if there are limitations into how big or small you can be to have a group certificate. Certainly, larger organizations tend to just have their own. But I believe the specifics come out in the how the agreement is made with that group certificate when it's created.
And to that point, somebody else ended up asking, and I think this might be beneficial to get a better understanding of it, is what is the typical use of the group certification? Is it for a company and their subsidiaries, or companies within a specific supply chain, or is it possible that a number of companies that may not be associated with each other could end up jumping onto a group certificate in order to be able to get the economies of scale, for instance?
Exactly. The idea is more for companies that might not otherwise have the financial capacity to undergo an individual certificate. So, smaller companies that are often in related sectors. So, as an example, we've had a group certificate in the past of a number of hardwood manufacturers. And so they were all grouped together because of the nature of what they did. But the idea would be for a group of printers or something like that, smaller companies coming together to get that benefit of economies of scale.
So, Joel, hopefully that answers your question there. So another question that came in here is that um, what's the process when applying hold on, I gotta read my own handwriting here from what I got. What's the process involved when you're looking to apply an SFI logo on a particular piece of printed collateral? Like, what's the vetting process? Typically, how much time does it end up taking from the time of application to the time of approval? Ballpark.
Right. So with any instance of SFI label use, that does have to go to our Office of Label Use and Licensing for approval, which may sound onerous, but we have dedicated staff that monitor that database every day. And so we have a turnaround time of under 24 hours as the standard, but it's often within a few hours that from time of submission to approval. And the submission process is quite has been simplified, where you would log into your account, submit the information of the job that you're doing. So you're making this product with this input material, and upload an image of what that label claim would be on the product. Our team then reviews that information to make sure it's in compliance with that the claim being made matches the input material claim, and then we approve it for you. And so, yeah, we have a set of staff members that are always looking at our requests and approving, often within an hour or two.
Great. So last question I've got on this, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe provide some little bit of insight around, who are some of your paper guys at least, because I think a lot of the people who we've got on the call right now are mostly printers, who are certified. I know, like the high volume guys who end up making stuff that you would end up getting in flyers, for instance, like Irving is a certificate carrier. And I know that I've seen a lot of stuff like that, but there are other players out there as well. So can you just name off the
Yeah,
top a few of
I'm
that?
trying to think off the top of my head a few printers that come to mind. The Printing House is certified, Transcontinental. Um, we have a publicly searchable database as well, where if you are looking to find um, uh, if you are looking to find a certain certified company in a specific sector, and you can search that by location as well. Uh, other printers would be, Domtar, Sappi, that sort of thing, Silvano.
Yeah, I was going to, note Domtar because there's a bunch of Domtar folks on the call here that I can end up seeing. So I
Yeah,
wanted
and
to
sorry
make
to
sure we get to
clarify,
this.
those were paper manufacturers, not printers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, for sure, for sure. And you know what? So as a takeaway, perhaps we can provide the links for a couple of things that you ended up mentioning. Your certification bodies that we can collectively put in there, and we can put them up on our YouTube channel when they get posted, as well as a link to well, I think these are both resources that you guys have on our site, so that we can just provide those links to people and they can go click and find the resources necessary in order to, find out who they need to talk to get certified, and, what kinds of materials are available in the Canadian market. Um, so that kind of runs through the questions that we've got, barring any more coming through, which I don't see right at the moment. I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks, Zach. You've been great. I think we'll tear a page out of your presentation, and that it was very precise, moved along really, really quickly. The only screw up that we had was my mouse is misacting, and I scrolled through a couple of pages. And for everybody else that's on this call, the session has been recorded, and that video will be posted to our YouTube channel in the coming days. A note will go out to everybody who registered for the event that when the video gets posted, as well as the links that we've highlighted here and some of the other links that we discussed before. If you enjoyed the event, please share that video with your colleagues and stay on top of the content. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, and we encourage people to join SMG, because it's only through your participation that we get the opportunity to be able to host this kind of content, and that's very important for us. And lastly, and the link is provided in the chat here. I hope people will take the opportunity to copy it, but we will send it out later on. Is we are hosting the launch of our plastics roadmap next week, in this same time. And that's an important piece for us, because it aligns us with a lot of efforts that are being done by Canada Post, as well as others within the supply chain, and ensuring that we align our best practices with everybody. Thanks, Zach. Thank everybody else for attending this session, and hope to see you guys soon.
Yep. Thanks, Andrew. And I would just say, if anyone's interested in learning more, I just put our link to our website, forest.org, in the chat. My email's on there, and we're a pretty approachable group. So if there's a question, feel free to reach out to me, or I can put you in contact with maybe the most relevant person. So thank
Yeah,
you.
I can personally attest to that, in terms of you guys being very approachable. Thank you, everybody. Have yourselves a good one.
Thank you.